I pounded a nail into the wall and wrote happy stamps on the rejection slip and poked it onto the nail. I felt pretty good, actually. When you're still too young to shave, optimism is a perfectly legitimate response to failure. By the time I was 14 and shaving twice a week, whether I needed it or not, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of the rejection slips impaled upon it. I replaced it with a spike and went on writing. By the time I was 16, I began to get rejection slips with handwritten notes, a little more encouraging. The first of these hopeful notes was from the editor of fantasy and science fiction that said, "This is good. Not for us, but good. You have talent. Submit again." Those four brief sentences, scribbled by fountain pen, that left a big, ragged blotch in its wake, brightened this dismal rider on my 16th year. These opening words come from the book that I just finished reading, and it's called On Writing by Stephen King. This book is about what it takes to master your craft. If you're willing to submit yourself to the grind that is, the lessons that King teaches us on writing, the deep focus and love that he has, these can be poured into any craft that you love. It's not just about writing from my view. The benefits and the discipline that we learn, they hit just as hard in business. Simple and deep ideas, such as if you don't have the time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. Reading shapes everything for Stephen King, just like it did for a young Andrew Carnegie, who later built more than 3,000 libraries so that he could share his love of reading. And a quote that I love from Charlie Munger. He says, "In my whole life, I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time." And another idea that hits me really hard right here, King says, your job isn't to find ideas, but to recognize them. Recognize when they show up. Compare this with Sam Waltman, what he says. The world is already full of useful ideas if you stay humble enough to notice them. I'm shocked at just how simple this really is. When we're receptive to the world around us, ideas are going to be presented. For me, that means staying open, listening without judgment, leaning in with curiosity, and most importantly, reading. Always reading and applying the lessons in life or in business. Many times in the book, King says, to be a writer, you must be a reader. Plain and simple. Read as much as you possibly can. Over and over, he stresses if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. When we show up every single day, we put in our best effort, and then we come back the next day and we do it all over again, the results will stack up. So today, we're going to pull out the biggest lessons from Stephen King's book on writing, and I think you're going to be surprised how much we can learn and apply towards our businesses. To get started, I wanted to take us to Stephen King's first big breakout. That is his book Carrie. It's published in the spring of 1974. The book, however, almost never sees daylight, as Stephen King had chucked an early draft of it in the trash can out of frustration. But before we get to that story, we have to go back in time when Stephen was perhaps 6 years old or so. He's in first grade. Comic books, they're all the rage, and he's burning through them like a brush fire on a windy day. The reading, it starts to translate into writing. I would copy Combat Casey comics, word for word, in my Blue Hornet tablet, sometimes adding my own descriptions where they seemed appropriate. So he's written out his little story. He's feeling really happy about it. He has like this internal pride that he feels about it, like he's done a great thing. So he brings it to his mother for her eyes to read. And she's charmed with the writing. She's smiling. She has this radiant feeling. Stephen, he feels it. He feels this warmth and excitement inside of him. But then she asks, "Did you come up with this story yourself?" I was forced to admit that I had copied most of it out of the funny book. In his mother's smile, it fades. Stephen, he can see this and he can feel the energy inside of himself also fade. And his mother responds and she says, "Write one of your own, Stevie. I bet you could do it better. Write one of your own." This feeling of empowerment as a young boy, it just explodes inside of him. And so he writes this story about four magic animals that are in a car. Their leader is a rabbit, also named Mr. Rabbit Trick. And a short time later, he hands the story back to his mother, and he has this great big ball of nerves inside, just anticipating what her reaction is going to be. She laughed at all the right places. She said it was good enough to be in a book. Nothing anyone has said to me since has made me feel any happier. That sentence is just magical. His mother's words, I see them as a bridge across the wide canyon from being a reader to a writer. His mother, she asked for more, and Stephen has his first contract. 4 stories, a quarter apiece. That was the first buck I made in this business. This is also rocket fuel in his tank. It propels him across that bridge. And that's something you really need when you're slamming rejection slip after rejection slip through that nail hammered in the wall. Each no is one step closer. This is the same tenacity that we saw with Kent Taylor, who was rejected more than 130 times trying to raise funds to start his Texas Roadhouse dream. Or Herb Kelleher, who spent the first 4 years of Southwest Airlines' infancy battling against apex predators in the courtroom, taking the bitter fight all the way to the Texas Supreme Court and winning. Stephen King, he is relentless. If we jump forward in time, Stephen, he's teaching high school English. He's living in this trailer with his wife Tabitha, and he has 2 small kids. To say that he's broke is really putting it politely. He was barely scraping by. In his writing career, he's still grinding it out. He's now publishing a few stories here and there in the men's nudie magazines, for which he gets paid a minimal amount, $50 here, $65 over there. It's very sporadic. But it does help him financially, and it gives him a light at the end of the tunnel, something to work towards. But life is very difficult. I was driving a Buick with a transmission problem that we couldn't afford to fix. Tabby was working at Dunkin' Donuts. We had no telephone. We simply couldn't afford the monthly charge. The bigger deal was that, for the first time in my life, writing was hard. The problem was the teaching. I like my coworkers and love the kids, but by most Friday afternoons, I felt as if I had spent the week with jumper cables clamped to my brain. If I ever came close to destroying my future career as a writer, it was then. I could see myself 30 years on, wearing the same shabby tweed coats with patches on my elbow, pot belly rolling over my Gap khakis from too much beer. In my desk drawer, 6 or 7 unfinished manuscripts, which I would take out and tinker with from time to time, usually when drunk. And of course, I would lie to myself, telling myself there was still time. It wasn't too late. What he's describing right here, this is where most folks lose their dream in life. They've got that first job secure. They start grinding away to pay the bills, oftentimes doing something they don't love. You look up, it's 10, 15, 20 years later, and it's easy to lie to yourself at that point. I'm sure that King, he wanted to quit, telling himself maybe, hey, I'm not good enough for this, or what's the point? Why am I spending all this time writing? I could go be playing with the kids or go outside or do something else. Give it up already. But he doesn't. He pushes forward with his dream. You have to believe in yourself and your craft. Each day, Stephen King, even with the jumper cables clamped to his brain, he reads and he writes. Those are the basics, reading and writing. Soon things are going to start stacking up. And so, if we recall that line from earlier that says, your job isn't to find ideas, but to recognize them when they show up. This is important because one day a good idea shows up. Stephen had read this article in Life magazine about telekinesis, or the ability to move things with your mind. And that article said that it was more prone in adolescent girls. Along with this, he has this experience from high school, seeing girls that were teased or poked on, those that had really low self esteem. He says, pow, two unrelated ideas, adolescent cruelty and telekinesis, came together and I had an idea. If we zoom in here, we're going to find King in the laundry room of his double wide trailer. He's pounding away on his wife's portable typewriter, balancing a child's desk on his thigh. He's excited and he's banging out his story. He's running wild with it. His mind is just going crazy with all of the thoughts, the possibility it just might be good enough to sell a Playboy. In the world of men's magazines, Playboy is the pinnacle. They paid upwards of $2,000 for fiction stories. Absolute gold, pure gold if you're a struggling writer and you have a family and you're desperate for cash. So he's running at 100 miles an hour when, bam, slams into a brick wall. After only 3 pages, King tosses his future $400,000 paycheck into the trash. But why? King calls out 4 reasons here, and I really like his honesty. These are brilliant lessons for you and I. First, he doesn't like the story, it doesn't move him emotionally. Second, he doesn't like the lead character. Third, King, he's not feeling comfortable with the surroundings. The story, it's an all girl cast, and then a lot of the scenes take place in the girls' locker room. He doesn't know anything about that. And then, most importantly, the fourth reason here, King recognizes that to tell the story properly, it needed to play out much longer than any of the men's magazines would allow. And so I imagine him playing a mini game of basketball as he shoots and scores into the trash can with that early manuscript. The very next day, his wife Tabitha fishes the crumpled sheets out of the wastebasket. She smooths them out and reads them over. She wanted to know the rest of the story. I told her I didn't know jack shit about high school girls. She said she'd help me with that part. You've got something here, she said. I really think you do. And I'll just ask, who is your Tabitha? For Stephen King, it's his wife who believes in him. Having just one person who believes in you, in your mission in life, that's all it takes. My wife made the critical difference. She never voiced a single doubt. Her support was a constant. One of the few good things I could take as a given. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. They don't have to make speeches. Just believing is usually enough. This is Helen Walton, believing in Sam so deeply that they pledged their houses and their property, everything they had, to open that first Walmart store in Bentonville, Arkansas. In my book, I wrote, key to success after that last line. Possibly without Tabitha, we don't have Stephen King that we know today. She is also what he calls his critic and first reader. Her opinion carries a lot of weight. In fact, he says the following about this. She's the one I write for, the one I want to wow. If you're writing primarily for one person besides yourself, I advise you to pay very close attention to that person's opinion. King writes, Tabby advises. With the manuscript of Carrie complete, prayers are said and fingers are crossed, it's sent off to their publisher, who King has a thin thread of a relationship with. The result is that they buy the book with a $2,500 advance. That at least allows him to get a telephone installed into his home. This is the biggest paycheck that he has to date for writing, And as a writer, you write. King, he forgets about Carrie until one day the phone rings out of the blue. On the other end of the line is his publisher, Bill, and he begins with that classic line, "Are you sitting down?" Stephen responds, no, do I need to? You might, he said. The paperback rights to Carrie went to Sing It Books for $400,000. On that Mother's Day in May of 1973, I was completely speechless. I stood there in the doorway, casting the same shadow as always, but I couldn't talk. Bill asked if I was still there, kind of laughing as he said it. He knew I was. I hadn't heard him right. Couldn't have. The idea allowed me to find my voice again, at least. Did you say it went for $40,000? $400,000, he said. Our place on Sanford Street rented for $90 a month, and this man I had only met once face to face was telling me I had just won the lottery. The strength ran out of my legs. I didn't fall exactly, but I kind of whooshed down to a sitting position there in the doorway. It's just absolutely nuts to think that he threw that idea in the trash. And he's bold enough to admit his mistakes. I don't know about you, but the next time I'm thinking about tossing an idea in the trash, I'm going to talk it over with my wife. She's really good at seeing things that I miss. How about you? Who is your tabby? Who can help you see the ideas that you might be missing? King, he now has some money for the first time in his life, but success without the right tools can destroy you. Which brings you and I to Uncle Orrin's toolbox. For this, we have to go back to when Stephen was 8 or 9 years old, and he finds himself helping his Uncle Orrin fix a broken screen on the far side of the house. Stephen, he does the easy part, he carries the screen. His uncle lugs this big ass, heavy wooden toolbox all the way around to the other side of the house. To fix the window screen, he pulls out a screwdriver from the very top of the toolbox. He removes 8 screws from the frame of the old screen, lines up the holes of the new screen, and then puts the screws back in. He hands the screwdriver back to Stephen and tells him to put it back in the toolbox. Job done. Intrigued by this, Stephen, he asks, why did you lug this 80 to 120 pound box of tools all the way around to the other side of the house if all you needed was just one tool? His uncle responds, I didn't know what else I might find to do once I got out here, did I? It's best to have your tools with you. If you don't, you're apt to find something you didn't expect and get discouraged. This lesson, it leaves a really deep impression on King. In the book, he translates it in the following way. Think about the toolbox as having several levels. On the top level, this is where all your common tools go. The ones that you use the most, the screwdriver, the hammer, the tip measure. For a writer, it's simple. Those are words. Those go on the very top. In business, for you and I, that could be our communication skills, our willingness to learn or be creative. For others, it might be our strict focus on service. And one of my favorite quotes of all time, it comes from Jim Casey, who was the founder of UPS. And he says that service is the sum of many little things done well. Service was on the top shelf of the toolbox for Jim Casey. Going down a layer, tools that are a little less common. Maybe that's process development or expanding into new markets. I think about Harry Schneider, In-N-Out Burger here. On the second shelf in the toolbox would be opening new locations. It took him 25 years to open 12 locations, but this entire time he was focused on those top shelf tools, product quality, cleanliness, and superior service. And then at the bottom of the toolbox, those are your specialty tools. On episode 15, we studied Samuel Cunard. In 1825, he pulled a tool out from the bottom of the box when he sat on a ship from Halifax to England for 8 weeks so that he could land a contract with the East India Tea Company to transport tea from China back to Canada. This is a contract that he keeps for 37 years. And with the contacts that he made from that trip, the next time he pulls out this tool, crossing the Atlantic, that is, he secures an even bigger contract with the British government to carry mail. Once your toolbox is built, you can start excavating. And I like the way that Stephen King thinks about stories. As mentioned earlier, your job is to realize when the story is in front of you. He believes that stories are found things, much like fossils in the ground. Stories are relics. They're part of an undiscovered pre existing world, and a writer's job is to use the tools in his or her toolbox to get as much of each one of those stories out of the ground as possible. You can use a jackhammer, it would do the job, but that fossil that might be worth millions is going to be broken up into a ton of tiny little bitty pieces. Or you can use the tools in your box, your skills, your knowledge, your network, your systems, and excavate with precision. Like King says, it's all there. You just have to be bold enough to get it out of the ground. Each day takes an effort, each day takes a focus, and those things stack brick by brick. And that's the point. When you put in the work, this prepares you for what you can't predict so that when those things come along, you can excavate them from the ground beautifully. For Stephen King, the work looks like 2,000 words a day. Each day starts in the morning, and it's not just some days, it's every day. Christmas, Easter, his birthday, 4th of July, it doesn't matter. To drill in even deeper here, he writes with the door closed. This is his way of telling the outside world to stay the F away. In his office, you find no telephones, no TVs. It's pure focus. Stephen says it's similar to sleeping. You tell your body when to sleep, and if you do this at the same time each day, it falls into a nice routine. Same thing with writing, or it could be your reading time, or your self reflection time, or your creativity time. If you do it each day at the same time, you fall into a pattern and your brain likes that. For King, it's always writing, very first thing in the morning, focusing on banging out those 2,000 words. And since we're on a toolbox analogy here, just to hammer this home, I love this line of thinking here. King explains that his son Owen, when he was younger, he wanted to learn to play the saxophone. So he starts taking lessons, but he only takes the sax out of the case during lesson time. Never once did he just decide to go practice on his own. So finally, after about a half a year of lessons, Stephen suggests that they stop, and his son Owen, he's relieved. And how did King know it was time to toss in the towel? Talent renders the whole idea of rehearsal meaningless. When you find something at which you are talented, you do it until your fingers bleed or your eyes are ready to fall out of your head. Why does this matter? Because if your work feels like rehearsal, you're in the wrong line of business. Work on something you love is the message here. For King, writing 2,000 words a day, that's not work. This is playtime. Again, that line that says, talent renders the whole idea of rehearsal meaningless. That's how I feel about this podcast. For me, it doesn't feel like work. It's fun, and I enjoy reading the books, learning, and putting those lessons into practice, and sharing what I learn on each episode. There's no pay for doing this, yet I wake up each morning at 4:30 or 5 o'clock so that I can read and outline episodes, and I just love doing it. Each day is a joy for me. It's fun, and I hope that I can keep doing this for a long time. All right, so where are we at? Stephen King, he has his writer's toolbox, and this is a beautiful lesson for us. And he's been building it and he's been refining it for many years. Things are going well. He signs book deal after book deal. In early 1981, King he goes out and he purchases the big ass desk of his dream. It's a big oak slab. It's set up in the back of his house and it just dominates his entire space. For the next 6 years, he sits behind that desk, getting drunk or wrecked out of his mind on drugs. He says, I was like a ship's captain in charge of a voyage to nowhere. By the mid 1980s, King is drinking like crazy. He says he was drinking a case of 16-ounce tall boys every night. He adds in cocaine, Valium, Xanax, cough syrup, mouthwash, just about anything he can get his hands on. He says that he wrote the novel Cujo and he barely even remembers writing it. That's how wrecked he was. And then check this craziness out. I wrote the Tommyknockers, often working until midnight with my heart running at 130 beats a minute and cotton swabs stuck up my nose to stem the coke-induced bleeding. Wow, can't even imagine. And I really like that book, Tommyknockers. It was a good book. In the early 90s, I guess maybe I was 13 or 14. That's when I picked up my first Stephen King book, The Dead Zone. I found it at a garage sale. I think I paid like 50 cents for it, give or take. And as soon as I started reading that book, I was hooked. And I went on to read everything that he had published up to that point in time, perhaps maybe 16 or 17 books. Somewhere I think I still have most of them, even though I haven't read any of his books for 30 years or so. When I read this book on writing, it just felt really familiar. Stephen King, he's really a master storyteller. And I had a hard time putting this book down, to be honest with you. It's just that good. And I'm looking forward to reading some of his newer stuff. I've actually ordered a few books on Amazon, and I'm going to enjoy those maybe in the evening time when I have a little bit of free time. So to steer us back to the story here, King, he's pressing on. He's doing book deal after book deal. He's drunk. He's high. And he's working on this new novel. It's called Misery, which he says also describes his state of mind. And his saving grace here is the same woman who pulled Carrie out of the wastebasket, his wife Tabitha. She had organized an intervention. Tabby began by dumping a trash bag full of stuff from my office out on the rug. Beer cans, cigarette butts, cocaine in gram bottles, and cocaine in plastic baggies. Coke spoons caked with snot and blood. Valium, Xanax, bottles of Robitussin cough syrup and NyQuil cold medicine, and even bottles of mouthwash. So in front of the family and his friends, Tabitha says, either get help or get the hell out of the house. She said that she and the kids love me, and for that very reason, none of them wanted to witness my suicide. And what he does next is just crazy. He's a really good addict. He asked for 2 weeks to think about it. Looking back, King, he uses this powerful way to describe his lunacy. Guy is standing on top of a burning building. Helicopter arrives, hovers, drops a rope ladder. Climb up, the man leaning out of the helicopter door shouts. Guy on top of the burning building responds, give me 2 weeks to think about it. That is simply nuts. I know it's not funny, but that's just crazy. But I do give him credit here because he does think about it. He knows that his wife is serious, and he was tired of living in this tortured state of mind. In the end, he says it was the character Annie Wilkes, the psycho nurse in the Misery book that he was writing, who was holding the writer hostage and abusing him, that made Stephen King become sober. Annie was coke, Annie was booze, and I decided I was tired of being Annie's pet writer. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to work anymore if I quit drinking and drugging, but I decided that I would trade writing for staying married and watching the kids grow up. Not long after getting sober, King gets rid of that big desk in the middle of the room. That big desk represents his ego. This is also the founder who thinks everything revolves around them, the one who doesn't listen to other voices of opinion, but finds himself bankrupt 5 years after they start. King trades in that big ass desk for a small desk and he places it in the corner of the room. This is Elon Musk sleeping on the factory floor, and Sam Zamuri out there in the jungle and the warehouses with his workers, and Herb Kelleher serving drinks during Southwest airline flights. The small desk is there to serve your purpose in business and serve your customers and your employees. It's not there to serve your ego. Stephen King, he gives us a beautiful statement to think about here. It starts with this: put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art, it's the other way around. Little by little, King, he learns to write sober, and he says that the joy in his work returns. For the next dozen years, Stephen is writing and he's enjoying his family. As part of a healthy daily routine, King, he likes to go outside in the afternoon for a 4 or 5 mile walk to connect with nature. One afternoon, June 19th, 1999, he sets off for his daily walk. 2,000 words are complete for the day. He's feeling really good. And those words that he had written just so happened to be this exact book that you and I are talking about right now on writing. So King, he's out walking. There's this car that passes by, and the lady in the car who's driving, she notices that there's this blue Dodge van that's weaving all over the road. And she says to her passenger, "That was Stephen King walking back there. I sure hope the guy in the van doesn't hit him." King describes his walk along Route 5 as generally having good visibility towards the oncoming traffic, with the exception of one hill just as you reach the crest of the hill. The man in the van, Mr. Smith, he's focused on his dog in the back seat who's trying to get into a cooler full of meat. His dog's name is Bullet, just like his blue Dodge van. At the crest of that hill, the van appears, not in the center of the road, but squarely on the shoulder where King was walking. I had perhaps 3/4 of a second to register this. It was just enough time to think, my God, I'm going to be hit by a school bus. Stephen is sent 14 feet in the air and he lands hard on the side of the road. His right leg is broken in at least 9 places. His hip is fractured, his spine is chipped in 8 places. He has 4 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a scalp laceration. My goodness, that is just brutal. I can't even imagine the pain. And how his wife, Tabitha, felt. She was right there by his side the entire time. He's really lucky to be alive. King's rushed to the local hospital. They don't have the proper medical services, so they take him on life flight to a bigger hospital in Lewiston, Maine. His leg is going to need at least 5 operations. During this time, his weight drops from 216 pounds down to 165. He's confined to a wheelchair and then finally makes his way to a walker. Mr. Smith, the driver, this is nuts. This is crazy. I can't believe this. He gets a slap on the wrist, 6 months county jail, and a year suspension of his driving privileges. King is in the hospital for 3 weeks in brutal, agonizing pain. But finally, he is cleared to go home. And what happens once he gets home? The voice inside, it starts talking, telling him to write. Do what you love is what it is saying. I didn't want to go back to work. I was in a lot of pain, unable to bend my right knee, and restricted to a walker. Sitting was torture after 40 minutes and impossible after an hour and 15. Yet at the same time, I felt I had reached one of those crossroads moments when you're all out of choices. And I had been in terrible situations before, which the writing had helped me get over and had helped me forget myself for at least a little while. His wife, instead of protesting, supports his decision. She also knows this is good for him. She rigs up a table in the back hall outside of the pantry. She puts a laptop, a printer, and a fan. She also brings the manuscript of this book that we're talking about right now, puts all of his notes on top, and tops it off with a framed photo of their younger son. And how did that first writing session go? An hour and 40 minutes, by far the longest period I had spent sitting upright since being struck by Mr. Smith's van. When it was over, I was dripping with sweat and almost too exhausted to sit up straight in my wheelchair. The pain in my hip was just short of apocalyptic, and the first 500 words were uniquely terrifying. It was as if I had never written anything before them. There was no miraculous breakthrough that afternoon. All I knew is that the words started coming a little faster after a while and then a little faster still. My hip hurt. My back still hurt. My leg too. But those hurts began to seem a little farther away. I started to get on top of them. There was a sense of accomplishment that was almost as good. I'd gotten going. There was that much. The scariest moment is always just before you start. After that, things can only get better. That is so true. The hardest part is just getting started. King started riding Carrie in the laundry room of his double wide trailer. Decades later, after everything, the fame, the addiction, the recovery of the van, he's come full circle to riding in the back of his house on a little desk that serves its purpose. His final message in the book, and I love this, the first word starts with writing, and I think it can easily be substituted with the word business. Writing isn't about making money, getting famous, getting dates, getting laid, or making friends. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. Whatever your craft is, your business, your service, your art, the work is what saves you in the end. Not the status, not the money, not the big desk. It's the work itself. Find work that is play. That's the message Stephen King teaches you and I. That's where we'll leave the episode for today. I hope that you found some value that you can use in your business or your own personal life. If you would like to pick up a copy of the book, you can use a link in the show notes. And if you do use that link, you'll be helping to support children's literacy as I donate 100% of all commissions from that Amazon affiliate link. To close down the episode, just a final few words from the master himself, Stephen King. For me, not working is the real work. When I'm writing, it's all the playground. And the worst 3 hours I ever spent there was still pretty damned good. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.